Happy day after Yom Kippur, all. I hope that it was a meaningful and contemplative and satisfying day of thinking about who we are and how we can be who we are even in a better way. So I'm going to use the prayers from Yom Kippur to begin what is going to be a little Hebrew lesson at the beginning of this Dvar Torah, which is entitled, It's a Good Time to Listen Carefully. As part of the slichot that we say in tandem with the various Chazarat HaShas, with the various parts of the Yom Kippur service, we read the following 3 lines. Ha'azinu ha'Shem tefilatenu, v'hakshiva b'kol tachanonatenu, hakshiva l'kol shav'inu malkenu v'elokenu, ki elecha nitpalel, tehina aznecha kashevet, ve'einecha petuchot lishmoa, el ha'tefilah shel avdecha amcha Yisrael. In this short little piece, we have 3 words that we use for hearing. Ha'azina, ozen, ear, give ear, listen, hear. Hakshivu, lahakshiv, to listen, to be attentive. And lishmoa, shma, to hear, as Shlomo Riskin teaches, Rav Shlomo Riskin teaches, shma, ma means innards. Listen with your innermost being, with your ikar, with your core self. We read this as give ear, God, to our prayer. Ha'azina, hakshiva, listen to the voice of our pleading, our King, our God, because to you we are praying. Let your ears be kashevet, intent, and your eyes be open, the einecha petuchot, lishmoa. Now think about that. Your ears should be open, your eyes should be open to hear with what is inside of you. So that's that deeper type of hearing. Be open to hear the prayers of your servant, the people of Israel. This is, and could definitely be, one of the pizmonim, one of the refrains that we continue saying during Yom Kippur. And then if we don't hear it enough, the Parsha that comes this week is Parshat Ha'azinu. Listen carefully. We also know that the word ozen, to continue the Hebrew lesson for a moment, has to do with balance. Izun or moznaim is like a balance beam, or to keep a balance in nature, in all that we have. In other words, what we're being asked to do is to attend carefully. Remember, nitzavim, standing at attention. A lot of standing that we do during the Yom Kippur service. Truly listen while standing at attention, lahakshiv, lishmoa, and maintaining balance. Izun. To be sure, this is a tall order, but let's consider what is being communicated here. We read as follows in this week's Parsha. It begins in Perek Chaf Gimel 23, verses 1 through 4. Ha'azinu hashamayim va'adaber beira, v'tishma ha'aretz imrefi. Listen carefully, you heavens, and I will speak. And let the earth hear the words of my mouth. The doctrine of God will drop as rain. Speech will distill as the dew, and the small rain upon the tender grass, and as showers on the herbs. In other words, giving life to all, sustaining. For I will proclaim the name of God, ascribing your greatness to God. Ki Shem Hashem Yakra Havu Godo Lelokenu. The rock, God's work, is perfect. Hatsur Tamim Pa'alo. Ki chol derachav mishpat. All of its ways are justice. Who are the witnesses that are being called here by Moshe near the end of his leadership and life? The very heavens and the earth and their resources that will understand, perceive, and stand for the righteous and fair God of faith and belief forever, outliving any one generation, even and perhaps especially this one that has just experienced so much in their personal relationship with God and in witnessing the grandness of God through their years in the desert. In this song, that is chapter 32, Lev, heart, I will say more about that in a few weeks, of Devarim, we hear about God's love, about God's frustration, God's wrath, Israel's suffering, and the reasons for it, as well as the comforting of Israel, which will not be just for Israel's sake, but for all of humanity. Nachmanides explains how this is a daunting summary about our accountability and how all parts of creation, including our enemies, will stand as witness against us when we falter. They will stand attentively, and they will listen intentionally to the judgments on our dealings. And we see this repeatedly in the voice of the Nevi'im, the voice of our prophets. Rashbam reminds us that this is more about God's greatness that is being witnessed, and all that happens is to be understood within that context, both what is perceived to be good for us, as we subjectively think we objectively observe, and what is perceived as not good. Nechama Leibowitz poses the core concept of this text as follows. It is the divine purpose to raise the spiritual standards of God's creatures, improve their well-being in all respects, till the stage is attained when, as recorded in the familiar Aleinu prayer, all the inhabitants of the world will acknowledge and know that it is to thee, v'anachnu korim u'mishtachavim, to thee every knee must bend, and we will bow, and every tongue must speak your name. In this Sedra, the Almighty, as it were, expresses concern and apprehension that this ultimate purpose would be obstructed and undermined. Why and how could this happen? Remember the many warnings against idolatry, against worshiping the created thing on the same level or in competition, if you will, with the one who created all, including the heavens and the earth, that are now being called as witnesses to God's greatness, as opposed to being objects of worship for other cultures. Here we have a contrast developing regarding the unity of the first verses, namely that there is a breakdown in the relationship between the B'nai Yisrael and God, and the horrifying ripple effect that such a rift could cause. Many of our commentators explain in different ways that we often make the mistake of personalizing the reading of Torah to be about us or to be about me, when in reality, it is about the collective of all that God has created, and our place in that collective is ordained by God and hopefully earned by those who are so ordained. When that does not occur, and we allow our perspective to be tainted by excessive hubris, we lose our status and our purpose in God's creation, while the earth and the heavens will remain in their place. Thus, they are the most apt witnesses. If we listen properly, we will understand the balancing act played by all of these parts. Towards the end of the song, Moshe proclaims as follows in the verses 46 through 47. He says to them, "Set your heart, simu levavachem l'chol hadvarim she'ani ma'id bachem hayom, to all the words, and the word ed is used here, which I am as a witness stating to you today, that you may charge your children to observe to do all the words of this law, asher tatzavum et b'nechem lishmor, la'asot kol divrei Torah hazot. For it is no empty or meaningless thing for you, because this is your life. And through this teaching to your children, that is the way you will prolong your days upon the land when you go over the Jordan to possess it. Here we have the second element of the plan that will outlive and prolong their lives through attachment to the land, to God, and as testimony to their very existence, namely their children, our children. We remind ourselves of this injunction, the only assurance of our continuity in the Shema daily, V'shinantam levanecha, and you shall teach your children. It is most fitting that we read this parsha immediately after Yom HaKippurim and the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, but also before the final gate closes, as we are taught on Hoshana Rabbah. For during this time when we are judged and when we carefully consider the very nature of our relationship with God, we cannot help but be profoundly mindful of the limits of our human existence, which we have just spent hours and hours articulating aloud, using an abundance of language and metaphors tied to natural phenomena, incidentally, in our tefillot, and in also thinking privately within ourselves. It is precisely at this moment that we read of the limited sojourn in the world of none other than Moshe Rabbeinu, whom God instructs to look at the land that will be the future of the people he has led, for he will not enter it himself. Rashi and Ibn Ezra teach that Moshe is calling heaven and earth as his witness is a hint of his understanding of this reality, that he knew to call upon those created elements that would outlive all of the B'nai Yisrael present to remind future generations of this story and its important lessons. It would be the very heavens and earth on which the people sojourned that would remind those in the future of God's promise and the important breed that bound them. Just as the land cried out with the bloods of Cain's murdered brother and his future generations, according to Rashi in chapter 4, verse 10 of Breshit. And he could not escape what God knew to be true. This is now repeated at the end of our narrative for generations to come. God knows that the land and the heavens that God created stand as eternal witnesses. And Moshe is acknowledging that he too, in his inner core, gets this. It is also noteworthy to point out that in our own time frame, we are presently at the end of a Shemitah year. It would do us well to remember and truly listen to these profound and sometimes chilling lessons about humility and gratitude. To not take the ground, the earth, the heavens, and all within, and the tenuous balance they all maintain for granted, or to even think that we have any control over all that God has set in place. We must do our part to help maintain all of this, but we do not have control. The reading of Parshat Hazinu is the official end of the cycle of Shabbat Torah readings in terms of Shabbat. V'Zot HaBracha is read on Simchat Torah. Chassidut teaches that just as creation is invoked, and through the words of the Song of Hazinu, we cover so much ground of our history and interaction with God and the land to which we are tied, this chapter 32, Lamed Bet, which means heart in Hebrew, is indeed the heart of all the Torah. Further, as we know, with the first letter of the Torah being Bet and the final letter being Lamed, this cycle of listening with one's innards, Shema, here from within is cycled around. Last word is Yisrael, Lamed, Devarim. First letter is Breshit of Breshit, the first book of the Torah. And we go right and we continue. We do not stop. This is the heart of who we are as a people. We are enjoined to listen with our innards, Shema. Even as on Simchat Torah, the minute we finish the last reading of this cycle of Parshiot, we go directly to the beginning. This is our cycle, that of God, of our lives, of our hearts. Further, Chassidut teaches that with the invoking of creation and the focus on Torah being equated to rain and dew in verse Bet 2, we see that while physically speaking, rain and dew are both sources of nourishment, rain is formed from water that is lost to the atmosphere, while dew never ceases and appears spontaneously. We actually bless these two phenomena in our annual cycle as well. Water on Shmini Atzeret and dew on Pesach, the end of the general rain cycle in Israel. In this way, rain comes to represent how godliness comes to us from above, in direct response to our efforts and deeds, while dew is representative of God's eternal care and unconditional love, disproportionate to human actions and efforts, providing us with yet another nod to creation and the various elements we will read about when we return to our next Shabbat cycle of Torah readings. Pasuk Zayin, verse 7, is as follows. Zachor Yamot Olam, B'noshnat Dor V'Dor. Remember the days of old, the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will tell you to do this. Ask your elders, and they will tell you as well. In this verse, we see the primary importance of generational transmission, reminding ourselves and those generations that come after us to listen carefully with their entire being to what they are told about historical events so that we do not forget what happened, so that we do not forget the impact of experience. And most important, we do not forget that we too are part of this collective narrative. We see confirmation of the two instructions Moshe is given to pass on, namely, the writing down of the words of this song, taken by many to represent and actually to include all of Torah, and two, teaching it to future generations. So you have the Cliff Notes version, if you look at it that way, and then you have the injunction to teach all of the details and listen and learn carefully. Here we sit together as 5783 begins, and we sit in this season with its sometimes overwhelming mix of contemplative reflection and joyful celebrations, sharing of good food, and being overcome by thinking of the humble nature of the human being generally, and specifically our own ephemeral existence. How do we get through this? How do we move on? Through the balance that will hopefully come about by our giving ear, hazinu, izun, which is hinted at by the rooted meaning. Through remembering our place and through using our time and our resources to try to leave our constructive and intentional mark on the world. I remember as a little girl thinking right after Yom Kippur, how long can I go without doing anything wrong? I now know, as we all do, that this is not a constructive question, leading only to frustration, as we are human beings with bechira chavshit, and often conflicting needs and pulls on our spirit with resulting choices and actions that may be the best course of action at a given time, even though it may not be the objectively correct course of action. Just as our very existence is within boundaries and not timeless, so too is our aspirational goal of being faultless or perfect. Such is the nature of human reality. We are often told that Torah is much more about God and our aspirations to connect with a higher being than focusing on the details of human actions and travails. Maybe a better question is, how will I use this new year to become closer to God, maintain a better balance, and truly listen intentionally and act from my heart? Lishma ulasot min halev sheli, to listen carefully with all that I have and to act from my core being. I don't know, and I'm not even sure for myself if we find that comforting. But maybe in the words that we hear in Ha'azinu, there's an approach to be taken. Remember the land on which we live and use it and its resources well. As we do this after this past Shemitah year, these words should ring even more loudly as we give ear. Ha'azinu. Do the best we can in our own lives, remember our relationship to God, and teach our children so that they remember our collective narrative. In this way, perhaps we can achieve some sense of legacy. It certainly seems to me that Moshe Rabbeinu did just that, and perhaps it is in this spirit that the very last words of Torah evoke that there was none other like him. As the final gate closes on Hoshana Rabbah, may we all remember our place in the larger context of our collective existence and have a year of health, happiness, fulfillment, and meaningful and intentional living. I want to end by just walking through a little bit of the next 2 weeks and moving on. Next week, Thursday, we will be in Chol HaMoed Sukkot. I've been given the honor, Rabbi Eliezer Hirsch, I cannot say enough good things about him, to give the Dvar Torah at Makor HaBracha. So if you go there, please do not listen to this, because I'm actually going to extrapolate from that for this discussion about some meaningful junctures of change on Shmini Atzeret. So it walks a little bit away from the Parsha cycle, since the reading we will be engaging in next Shabbat is a day of Chol HaMoed Sukkot. We then will begin Breshit the following week after Simchat Torah. And for the coming year, as I focused on Shemitah and some general lessons in the past and inclusion and various ideas, not that every theme comes through in every single Parsha, but certainly I will be mindful of speaking to texts that we may not generally pay attention to. So looking at some of the kind of off-the-grid ideas, perhaps, and what they mean and what they bring to us from the Parshiot. So for those of you that are looking for the more generalized and bigger lessons, if you will, I invite you to go to MBIEE, Melrose B'nai Yisrael Emmanuel, their Facebook page, Ask to be Admitted, and you can access the earlier Parshiot HaShavua that do speak to those larger lessons. Everything is labeled, so you just have to put my name in the search engine and then just scroll down. In the meantime, I wish all a joyous and meaningful and lovely Sukkot. Think of Haparas Sukkot Shlomecha, that God spreads the tent of peace over us, but that we are the ones that have to listen intently and intentionally to do what needs to be done to make that peace. Shabbat Shalom Lekulam.